This is Chapter 8, which focuses on cognitive and language development in early childhood. And this is the part of the chapter you're going to need for your assignment number 2. So when we talk about Piaget's theory of cognitive development, let's look at a difference between pre-operational thought child, which is the stage for early childhood of Piaget's cognitive theory, and a child who is at a higher level or stage of cognitive development. So this is a story of an incident that the author's children participated in, and it's a conversation he had with his daughters while traveling home in their car as a full moon hovered to the left above a long row of houses beside the freeway. And Julia, who's 3.5, looking out the window, says, "Look, the moon is following us." Lauren, who's age 11, says, "No, it's not. The moon doesn't follow people around. It's far away." Julia says, "It is following us, see?" And she points to the moon. Lauren says, "It only looks like it is, but that can't happen." Julia, "It is following us, isn't it, Dad?" And Dad says, "Nope, it only looks that way, honey." Julia was silent until we got home. A few minutes later, she got out of the car and looked up at the moon, and she said triumphantly, "See, I was right. It did follow us." So that's a good example of the perspective of a child in pre-operational thought. They believe in the animation of things in the natural world and of animals and also inanimate objects like rocks and the moon. So the second stage is pre-operational thought, and this goes from age 2 to 7. The cognitive world of preschool children in pre-operational thought is creative, free, and fanciful. They really are magical thinkers, and they believe in all kinds of things. The label pre-operational emphasizes that the child does not yet think with internal mental pictures, even though they have mental representations, but they're very rudimentary, and abstract thinking, which is what Piaget calls operations. Operations are reversible and abstract mental actions, and what he means by reversible is they can deconstruct and think back to the premise in a previous state. Pre-operational thought is the beginning of the ability to reconstruct in thought what has been established in sensory experience, motor movement, and behavior. And so that tells us during this stage, in order to move them through pre-operational thought, we have to give them lots of opportunities to use their senses and motor abilities with real objects and three-dimensional representations of those real objects if we can't provide the real objects. For example, if we're exploring sea creatures, we can't go out in a boat and look at killer whales in the sea, but we can use plastic representations of killer whales and use them in the water table so they can see how the killer whale's body shape moves in water. And that's a good example of the kinds of experiences that we have to provide so that in the future they can actually carry out that kind of experience in their mind when they reach abstract thinking. So there are 2 substages, not 6, in the second stage of Piaget's theory. And you will, for these substages, you will have to memorize the names of these. There's the symbolic function substage, which goes from ages 2 to 4. And in this substage, the young child symbolically represents an object in their mind that is not present, so they're using symbolic function. The second stage is from ages 4 to 7, and this is the intuitive thought substage. And in this stage, children begin to use primitive reasoning and want to know the answers to all sorts of questions. And it's called intuitive because young children seem so sure about their knowledge and understanding, yet are unaware of how they know what they know. A good example is Julia. She was very sure that the moon was following them. So symbolic function substage and intuitive thought substage. So children's thinking falls within the preoperational period and is characterized by advances in symbolic representation. The understanding that one object or action can stand for another. An example of symbolic representation is pretend play, in which toy figures and animals can come to life and interact with each other. And pretend play could also be dramatic play, where the child's pretending to do the kinds of things that adults do. So some characteristics of preoperational thought is egocentrism. And this is a child's tendency to adopt their own point of view and assume everyone else knows what they know and sees what they see and wants what they want. And so it's not that they're selfish or that they're self-centered. It's just that that's the level of cognitive development they're at. They're not able to see other people's perspective, and they assume everyone else thinks the same as they do. Animism, as we mentioned earlier, is the tendency to attribute human qualities or the qualities of other living things to inanimate objects, but then also equate human characteristics with animals or insects or other living creatures. A limitation in preoperational thought is that in early childhood, children cannot conserve. And conserving is being able to reason beyond your sensory information and to understand the principle of conservation. And let's look at what we mean by conservation. We don't mean it in an ecological sense, but in a cognitive sense. So according to Piaget, the lack of reversible mental operations is what gives the pre-operational period its name, leading to two errors in preschool thinking. They centrate or focus on one salient aspect or dimension at a time, so they can look at color or they could look at shape. But looking at color and shape together would be a struggle for them. They focus on appearances rather than reality. And so if you have two different types of glasses, one is wide and shallow, and the other is thin and tall, the preschool or preoperational child is going to want to have the tall glass of juice, even if you prove to them it's exactly the same amount of juice. It looks taller to them, so they're going to want that cup of juice rather than the shallow one. And so here are some examples of what Piaget means by conservation. Conservation of numbers. Here you have a number of elements in a collection, and if you just rearrange those elements so that one looks longer than the other, then the preschool child is going to believe that there are more of those items in the longer row. The average age of figuring out that that's not the case is age 6 to 7. The next is substance. And so you have a ball of Play-Doh or clay, and if you make it longer, the child is going to believe that there's more there than in the original one because it looks bigger. And this changes at ages 7 to 8. And remember, preoperational thought goes from 2 to 7, and 7 is second grade. Length, the same kind of thing. If we change the appearance, they're going to think that something is different. And so the average age to length conservation is 7 to 8. And then when it comes to area, this one takes longer, 8 to 9. Weight, this is 9 to 10. And then volume, we were talking about this in regards to the orange juice. This may take even longer. It may take until they're in formal operations almost. Okay, so those are the different types of conservation. So conservation cognitively just means that you can reverse back and know that it's still the same, even though the shape of it has changed or the size of it has changed. So one of the tasks in regards to egocentrism and perspective taking that Piaget uses is the three mountain problem. When asked to point to a picture of how the doll sees the display that the child's sitting in front of, children at the pre-operational stage will select a photo showing what they see. And even if you move them to the other side of the table and change the chairs, they're going to do the same thing, even though they had just been over on that side. They're going to pick the side they see at that time from their current perspective. And so since Piaget focuses on cognition, there is an educational philosophy that uses Piaget's ideas in an educational philosophy, and that's called the constructivistic approach. And so within school then, we're going to facilitate learning rather than telling them things. We're going to support them in actively exploring and discovering that themselves. We're going to consider what the child already knows and what level of thinking they're at. We're going to promote the children's intellectual health, and we want to turn the classroom into a setting of exploration and discovery, not just adults telling them things. So something that also changes in pre-operational thought and can take a while to form is something called theory of mind. And children begin to develop a theory of mind, and that is a set of ideas about what people are thinking, including what they see, remember, want, know, and believe. And here, understanding theory of mind escalates children in the telling of fantastic stories using imagination. So parents report an increase in these stories around age 4. So here's a test that's used in research in regards to theory of mind. So this is Sally. If you look on the right, Sally has a basket, and this is Anne. Anne has a box. Sally has a marble. She puts her marble in her basket. Sally goes for a walk. Anne takes the marble out of the basket and puts it into the box. Now Sally comes back. She wants to play with her marble. Where will she look for her marble? Children under 4 years of age answer that Sally will look for the marble in the box, confusing what they know with what the character knows. So again, they're egocentric in their perspective, and even though they know and they saw, that Sally wasn't there when the marble was in the box. They're still going to think she knows what they know. 4 to 5-year-olds answer that Sally will look in the basket, showing an understanding that people can have false beliefs. So now let's move from Piaget's discontinuous theory to a continuous theory of cognitive development and information processing. Cognitive neuroscience scientists distinguish 3 aspects of attention that improve dramatically during early childhood. So we've talked about the first 2 already in chapter 1 about theories, but let's review them. Sustained attention or attention span. This is the ability to focus on a particular task. Selective attention, again, is the ability to focus only on relative stimuli. And we're adding executive attention, and this is the ability to shift and divide attention among diverse stimuli or responses. And being able to control attention involves the prefrontal cortex, or the part of the brain that's just behind the forehead. Memory, as you remember, is another important part of information processing. Adults' earliest memories on average date from about 3.5 years of age. Autobiographical memory is the ability to recall early experiences. Possible explanations for weak autobiographical memories is the inability of infants to encode information verbally. Underdeveloped areas of the brain implicated in memory formation. And so what tends to happen is the individual will use scripts or generalized versions of events that happen to young children. Most often, even though this says the average date from age 3.5, most people actually don't remember events until they're in elementary school. Okay, so now let's talk about another discontinuous theorist that, remember, we're not going to talk about his stages in this class because he's very similar to Piaget, but we're going to talk about ways that he differs from Piaget. So, and his theory is often called the sociocultural approach. And Vygotsky says that there is a zone of proximal development, and we talked about that in the theories chapter. The gap between a child's ability to solve a problem on their own and their ability to solve it with the help of a more capable peer or an adult. And this utilization of the zone of proximal development is called scaffolding. And that is also educational philosophy as well. And so here, parents can use this too, this zone of proximal development. So let's look at how that's functioning in this picture. As children develop the ability to work on puzzles, the zone of proximal development develops as well. Now the child's solo performance might be as good as performance as their performance if an adult helps. So the child's performance on the puzzle will generally be higher with the adult helping them when working on it than working on it by themselves. So the adult's giving them tips and suggestions to help them achieve things they couldn't without their direct assistance.